I'm going to just be taking a little bit different angle on this. I'm going to be looking at the communication we do with ourselves. There was a presentation yesterday that Bill Purnett said 50% of us don't focus on results or outcomes. And I actually was thinking about that this morning. I think the truer statement for me would be less than 50% of people focus on positive results that they want. We all have a picture in our mind of what we want, but it's not necessarily conscious. And often it's from limiting beliefs. So we become less productive because we're pulling the past into the present moment, but we're not pulling the best of the past. We're pulling the worst scenarios often because it's been our habit as a culture to focus on what doesn't work. So one of the things that I wanted to remind you all of is to be able to be productive, you have to build courage in yourself. And it's just as important to us as water is to plants. And so we're constantly encouraging or discouraging those around us, and we are either contributing to their ability to function and be productive, or we're working against that. And we're also doing that internally with ourselves. So here's an encouragement strategy that is also a communication tool. It's one that you can use with other people, but it's also one that you can use internally with yourself. Have any of you heard of appreciative inquiry? Okay, you have, Stephen? Okay.
Show you a 1-minute video clip in which I'm going to have you do a count. With an audience this size, it's a very interesting phenomenon. Here's what it looks like. Okay, so there's 6 students, 3 white shirts, 3 black shirts. There's 2 basketballs, they're passing them back and forth. Your task is to count the number of passes in 1 minute between the white shirted students. Number of passes, they're going to be moving around, so it's complex. I want to show it to you. Number of passes by the white shirted students in 1 minute. Those of you that have seen this, don't blurt out the answer, but it's a very interesting effect where it turns out there's a gender differences on attention to this kind of detail with a lot of action going on. I won't tell you which gender is more accurate than the other, but we'll see.
So you guys count.
Okay, so here we go. Okay, how many did you get?
How many did you guys get?
17. 18, 17, 13. Okay, that's quite a spread. All right, good. Anybody see anything unusual? Show of hands.
Raise your hands if you saw anything unusual.
About half of you. So let me show it to you again. This time, don't count the passes. You're just watching globally what this looks like. It's called perceptual blindness or attention blindness, where you're attending to one task, you miss really obvious things, like a guy in an ape suit. So cognitively, we are primed to look for something. I primed you by giving you a detailed task. I upped the ante by saying one gender was better than the other. By the way, there's no gender difference. And this is a huge problem, in not just dealing with the paranormal and stuff, but all of science. We're primed to look for certain data to fit our theories. We can't help.
Okay, can you see how this fits even very well with what Stephen was teaching us about? That was a sequential instruction, and we weren't looking with our global eyes. Even if we're a global person, we wouldn't be looking, excuse me, oh, I've got a dry mouth. So one of the reasons this is important is because they say that 70% of our, what we know is not conscious to us. So what the scientists say is that there's 70% of what we don't know that we don't know. So we didn't realize, if you didn't see the gorilla, you didn't realize that the gorilla was there, so you didn't even know you didn't know that that was there. I've had people that were so convinced that that really wasn't in the first half that they made me show this, the first part again. They thought it was two completely different videos. That's how stubbornly we'll hold on to our perceptions of what is happening and what is not happening. Thank you. So the reason this is important is because when we're looking at our productivity, we are often looking at what is not working instead of what is working. And we're blind to the strengths that we could build upon. We're blind to the places we could encourage ourselves. So what I want you to know is the definition of appreciative inquiry is that when it's a way of asking questions that are appreciative in order to cause intentional outcomes. And you guys, if you don't want to write this down, I've got a handout for you with all of this in it. So just kind of don't worry about that part. It helps you to access the positive files in your brain that are often ignored, okay? So it's a shift. Einstein said that the significant problems that we face can't be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. So if we have a problem and we're focusing on the problem, it's going to be the harder way to get out of the problem, even though that seems completely backwards. He also said there's only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is a miracle. So part of what makes us productive is to live life as though it's a miracle. Be a happy learner. Be curious about what there is that's working and what could be improved, as opposed to what's problematic. So appreciative inquiry is very different from the traditional problem solving. I'm going to give you the example of, let's say you were a person that was married and you had a problem with your partner. And you went to a traditional counselor, and he would say to you, so tell me what the problems are in your relationship. And maybe the wife would say, he never helps me around the house. In appreciative inquiry, you would first start with that couple by saying, tell me when you were most in love. What are the stories around that? What is working in your relationship now? What would it look like if it was everything that it was at its best? And you see that's a very different starting place. And not only would you be asking those questions, you'd be asking for the stories around those questions and really listening to all the details of that. In a traditional problem solving, you would be focusing on what's the cause. Well, tell me about your childhood. What do you think is going on? And maybe the wife would say, well, I think it's because his mother did everything for him. Okay? What do you think is going to go on in the mind of the man at this point in time, right? Do you think he's getting more and more receptive and open? He's probably feeling very negative at that point, very discouraged. In appreciative inquiry, you want to remember the things that support change. So how can your successes and strengths help you now? What prompts new ideas and new vision? How could you bring more of what you really love to light? Those are the kinds of questions that counselor would be asking instead of digging down into the past and looking for where that problem orientation is. Now, by now, in the traditional model, you would be brainstorming solutions and analyzing possible actions. And there is a time and place for that, but it's not here. It's not the most helpful here. So how about you make a shared schedule of chores and stick to it? Like, that's a very sequential, practical thing to do on the surface, but it's not necessarily getting to the root of what's going on between them. In appreciative inquiry, you want to paint a picture of everything that you want. What would your marriage and partnership look like if it were the most supportive and imaginable? Now, even though that's a visual statement, it's also, when you're asking the questions, you're saying, what are you saying to each other? What are you doing together? What are you feeling with each other? So you're kind of touching on the kinesthetic, the auditory, the visual while you're doing that. Because when you ask appreciative questions, which we're going to have a little example of in a bit, you want to get all the meat off the bone. You want to be asking the questions of, as if you're hanging on every word of what happened, and then you did what, and how did it feel, and what were you hearing from other people. In the traditional model, you would, by this point, be starting right into doing the goal setting and the strategizing and the procedures and all of that. So that, in this case, write down the plan and review it every week. In appreciative inquiry, you'll be talking about what you want, what will be at its best. Now, this is the place, I think, where 50% of the people don't focus. What do I actually want? Not what do I not want, but what do I want? So we're going to create the loving marriage we want. If we could have it be any way possible, what would it look like? So that's going into the dream state. And in the traditional problem-solving mode, everything is approached as a challenge or a problem that has to be fixed, as opposed to this is an opportunity to evaluate what's going on, recreate something. So it's much more of a creation mode. And this side, it's like you're digging through dirt, and this side, you're panning for gold. So you can kind of picture that image of those people out in California in the early days, you know, and they're all excited about what they're going to find. And that's really the difference. It brings a totally different energy to your productivity. So imagine if you were in that negative, first, more traditional problem orientation. Some of the consequences that we don't realize is it would create defensiveness. If you came away from that counseling session with, you know, kind of talking about what the problem is, you're more likely to be defensive and sort of separate from each other as opposed to more connected. You're also more likely to be focusing on blaming. It's not my problem that you don't think I do enough chores or what have you. It also puts attention on the negative causes of yesterday, which is actually draining, and it slows down productivity. It doesn't mean it doesn't do anything. It's just not the efficient way to do it. It produces vocabularies of deficit. You never clean the house. You always do this. You know, it's focusing on those things that you don't like. So what we focus on becomes our reality, and we often focus on what's wrong or what's missing, and then we tend to see everything through that filter. So you can see how this would start to drain your productivity, right? Can you see that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So here's a few examples. What's the difference if I say to you, how are you? And what's the best thing that happened to you today? What could happen between those two worlds?
The first one could be either positive or negative.
Yes.
The second one would be positive.
Right. Even if you'd had a fever that morning and felt terrible, if I asked you what's the best thing that's happened to you today, you'd be looking in the filing cabinet of the good things, even though you have a whole easy, accessible list of the negative things. So it prompts you into that mindset or that groove that we don't tend to naturally go into. So let's say you're on a team. I had this situation with this guy one time where we were not having good teamwork. And so what I did prior to meeting with him was I sat down and I said, when did I have a similar experience in my past where I was having problems with team and I was able to turn it around? And I remembered situations from when I was in 6th grade and 8th grade. You know, it didn't even have to be recent. And then I focused on how I handled it and what were the outcomes. And then what would this relationship look and feel like and sound like if we were able to restore our teamwork to each other. And it was amazing because, and where is our teamwork good right now? It was really amazing because when I met this man to talk about our teamwork, I could see that he was kind of defensive at first, like when he first walked in the room. And literally within a few minutes, we were really having good rapport. I felt really positive. I felt very open. And at the end of it, what I had envisioned was that we had given each other a hug and we were like really feeling back on track. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I know if I hadn't done that, I would have been more likely to go into that meeting more guarded, more negative, more focused on, you know, fear and being closed, as opposed to being more open. So let's say you're leading something. Let's say you're leading your team, Rhonda, and you want to start off a meeting in a more positive note. You might say, hey, let's just take a second and regroup here. How about you turn to the person next to you and tell them one thing that you did this weekend that you're proud of or that you really had fun doing. And we used to do this in the schools. We'd ask the principals to get on the intercom and say, okay, turn to somebody next to you in the hall and tell them something you did how you helped someone. And what it does is it creates all kinds of conversations around feel-good topics instead of, oh, great, it's Monday and we have to be here and all of that kind of thing. During a meeting, let's say you're trying to figure out a solution to something, you could say, well, what outcome would you be happiest with? How would you and the others be feeling? What would you be doing? And what's nice about that for the kinesthetic learners is that you can talk about what would be the action you would take. What would you envision happening and have them talk about the activities and what the forward movement would be. Okay, this reminds me of a story about appreciative inquiry. There was a study done where they took several bowling teams and they videotaped all of their games. And then they took and made a video for one group of all their poor moves. And they just isolated their poor moves into the video. And then there was another video where they took all their successful moves and they put that into a video. And they had both teams watch the video every day with the intention of improving their game. So the group that watched all their mistakes and their errors, do you think that they improved their game? So you all think no? Actually, they did improve their game because intention is very, very important. Like if you set the intention, I'm going to watch this to improve, intention itself will carry some of the day. But they improved by 30%. Now the team that watched their video of all their positive moves every day, they doubled their scores. Like that's how much more efficient and effective it was. And which group do you think had more fun? Yeah, watching all the, yeah, great, look at me there, you know, wow, you know, and you feel good about those things that you did well, okay? So that's just good data. Now, most of us hold on to the idea that we have to approach things from a problem orientation. Oh, that's too Pollyanna to focus on your strengths. And yet, the evidence proves out in Olympics and all kinds of things that visualizing things at their perfection or their mastery is the most helpful. Okay, so it is, in a sense, this is where mind over matter is really important to productivity. One of the things I want you to think about, especially as a gardener, if you go into the garden and all you see are the weeds, and you're like, oh darn, more weeds to pull, versus, wow, I see the plants, I want to clear away the space around them so they can breathe really well, I want to feed them some things so that they really get hardy and strong. And I want to make sure that they have adequate sunlight and adequate water, and you feel like you're nurturing something. Can you see how different that feels than, oh great, there's weeds to pull? You don't even see the flower when you're in that mindset. Is there a space for you to open to possibilities that you can't see? Like we couldn't see that gorilla. So part of the way that, you know, we call it manifesting, but part of the way that we actually create the space for miracles is by opening into the thoughts that would lead to things that feel miraculous, okay? This is a way that we use language to choose appreciative ways of approaching things. So let's say you guys are at a meeting or you're talking to somebody and you have an idea to improve productivity. And somebody says, well, I've got this idea, but it's probably really stupid or lame or something. If you say hire, that the person will say, they're asked to say something positive instead of something negative. So if you would say to that person hire, then they would say, well, I have an idea and it might just work. Okay, we used to do this in ESPW. Also, think about what we do to kids. A lot of times when we leave to go out for the night, when you had little kids, we would say, now be good, now don't give her any trouble about the babysitter, right? What are we anticipating when we say those things? Yeah, exactly. So I would train myself to say to my kids, have fun. Oh my gosh, they're going to be so helpful to you. They know where everything is. They really are great. You know, like that kind of thing, because that is focusing on what is appreciative about them, not what I'm expecting at the worst case scenario. And you'd be amazed when you start noticing how much we're assuming the worst. Oh great, it's raining, the traffic's going to be horrible today. You know, like we think things and say things that are not appreciative. In medicine, they know that how you think affects whether you get better, even when it's placebo. There was a study done called the Rosenthal study, and it was about these students that were all very high-achieving students. And they put them in these classrooms, and they told the teachers, these are your spurters, they just made up the term, and these are your laggers. These are, but we want you to treat them all exactly the same. Don't indicate any kind of expectation to them. Just give them all the same treatment. Well, by the end of the year, the people that had been tagged laggers were all suffering and struggling. And it took 2 years for them to recuperate from, you know, their loss in esteem and their loss in mastery. And that was because of the expectation of the teacher. So that's how powerful our minds are in creating our reality. And so it's important that you consciously choose new habits that will help you think in a more positive, more solution-oriented manner. So that's what is called cognitive inner dialogue, where we talk about, like Kathy's affirmations is a great example of that. Why am I so good at doing this stuff? Why am I so, I'm getting better every day at following my diet or whatever it is. Those are cognitive inner dialogues that are offsetting. So that's a good example of an appreciative inquiry kind of thing. And then athletics, in that bowling example and the Olympics, they talk about people visualizing themselves. And it's, I think, isn't there studies done, Stephen, where the brain actually registers the muscle and all of that?
The brain doesn't know the difference between external events and the internal
yes.
events. So
right. So you can actually train without having to necessarily be doing it all the time.
Does this happen immediately, or does it take time?
It's pretty immediate. Like one of the things we'll talk about is, we'll do a little experiment where you'll do a little appreciative inquiry interview and you'll notice how you feel. And in a way, I'm kind of giving you the answer ahead of time, but when I do this in large groups and I have them do a small interview with each other, the whole room just starts getting really light and joyful and happy, and you hear people laughing and the sound gets louder because it lifts us to be thinking appreciatively. And we don't realize how dragged down we get by not thinking appreciatively, okay? And it's not about putting your head in the sand. It's not that you want to ignore problems or issues, but you want to approach them. Like I wasn't ignoring that I had this problem with teamwork with this guy, but I was going to approach it in the most productive way I could. So even if I had approached it the other way, just like the bowling example, I would have gotten progress, but it wouldn't have been as efficient or as effective or as fun. Yes?
Is there any research that shows that this improves engagement?
I don't know the specific research, but
Wouldn't you think so?
I would imagine so. I've seen it happen. We did this in a school one time where we had all the kids learn appreciative inquiry. It was in a project to help them improve graduation and be engaged in school, not give up, not drop out. And we brought in 200 people from the outside that had successfully graduated high school. And they had interview questions like, so Ms. Sexton, tell me a time that you wanted to quit on something in school or quit school and you didn't. What kept you from giving up? And so they would ask all the stories around that. Who helped you? Who inspired you? Who encouraged you? What made you have that determination? And so not only was it helping Kathy to remember all of that about herself, but it was giving the student the feeling of, wow, if she can do it, I can do it. And there were lots of things like that that they did. And so it raised the engagement level of the students so much that we actually got the results we wanted and we got an award for that project. Yes?
I need help in thinking about this long term. Every week we have safety meetings because gardening can be a dangerous activity. And so we review a different type of safety thing every week. Slips, trips, and falls, or working with machinery, whatever it is. But we also have a section of the meeting called near misses. And it's really in that part of the meeting that people think about what almost happened but didn't. And when you said this, I thought, gosh, it's too bad we come at it negatively. But in that, it's the only way we discover opportunities to be safer.
Well, I would just challenge whether it is the only way, because one of the things I think of whenever I'm in the highway and I see these signs that say $10,000 if you hit a worker, right? I think that is just the worst possible thing they could do. What it could be is we had 100,000 safe workers, thank you. You know, that would be more helpful to that situation than having...
But I'm trying to think of how do you uncover what isn't safe when you're doing the same repetitive thing day after day and nothing bad happens until it does. Like,
okay.
How do you reframe that?
So let's take an appreciative question around that. It would be something like, I noticed that you had complete safety today. What were the things you did to ensure that you were safe?
Okay.
And then you're walking them through the actual steps, the thought process. So what made you think to avoid this? What made you think that helped you to maintain that? Do you see how you can still walk the person through? Oh, well, first I thought of how it's going to be slick today, and so then I made sure that I had my right kind of boots on or whatever. Do you see?
Right.
So anything that you're asking from a negative perspective, you want to ask for what has been working, what is working, and what could work.
It's hard to get detailed information from my guys. I mean, I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean, well, we wore the PPEs. You know, I mean, to just keep delving for details.
Yes, when you do appreciative inquiry, the way that you do it is you ask as though you can't get enough information and you're hanging on every word. Okay. Oh, cool, so you wore those things and that really made a difference. Show me how you made sure that you didn't slip or whatever, especially if they're kinesthetic. I don't know exactly, I'm working on that one myself, but it's actually wanting to have them recreate the experience. Right. So that you hear what they heard in their mind or heard externally, what they felt in their heart or their body, all of that. So you want to, as globally as possible, recreate the positive thing that they did, okay? All right,
well,
so
couldn't you also, what you were saying, where you're talking about the near misses, those could be the celebration.
yes.
And you use that part of it more than the stuff that doesn't.
So the appreciative question around the near misses could be, so how did you recognize quickly and avoid a challenge and pull it off that it was safe. You know, you'd want to try to phrase it in the best possible way.
Successes, really.
Yes.
That's what they are.
Yes. Yes. So it'll actually plant better pictures in their head. Yes, Joy.
I just want to say that I think it really does work, because I'm thinking about a client that I met for the first time, and I knew that he was going to hit me with all the objections, all the bad things about factoring and whatever. And I just went with the attitude that I was going to listen to his situation and find out all what he thought first, and then be very comfortable with him and so forth. And it worked out fine.
Yes.
It was a good meeting.
Do you see how she was preparing herself in an appreciative way? Oh, this is going to work out great. If I pay attention, it's going to be a wonderful outcome. And so she was already ready for that. She was already perceiving that. Like your questions, why am I ready to have this great meeting? Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is you want to discover, you want to practice appreciating that which gives life. So you want to start asking yourself appreciative questions when you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror, you know, what's working? Oh, wow, my hair's working today, or whatever. You also want to find experiences that work or have worked around any problem areas that you have. Then you want to start dreaming and envisioning the impact that you actually want. This is the part most of us don't do. We're so busy reacting to other people and what they want from us and getting their approval and their acceptance and their love that we're not even saying, what is it that I'm feeling and what do I want? So what's the best thing that can happen? And then we design or co-construct the future. So what we do is we take the past examples to design the best of what we want going forward. Oh, I liked this part. I liked this part. I'm going to bring that forward and I'm going to add this to it. So that's a much more positive, exciting way to create something. And then you want to go into actionable steps to put into delivery. Take those ideas and turn them into actions, like I did with that guy. I had a real experience with that guy about the teamwork, that it was actionable, and I now have it imprinted on me to do that whenever I have a problem with someone. Okay, so appreciative inquiry helps because it creates a critical mass of people drawing on positive images. Whether that critical mass is just yourself or you and one other person, or it's a whole group of people. It's a way to focus healthy chaotic ways of thinking and processing into quick, new, creative solutions. It's a way to take our self-determination and our purposefulness. We are all self-determining. We're all creating our reality. We're all purposeful in what we do. We might as well get conscious with it and use it instead of being a loose cannon with it. Most of us are walking around as loose cannons with our intention, as opposed to taking charge of it. It also is a way to work with other people and not do things to them. And it's a way to leverage the power of language, images, and feelings and use them to be creating rather than discouraging. Okay? So I thought do we have time for a little appreciative interview?
A little bit.
Okay. So what I'd like you guys to do is first describe and just as briefly as you can, just partner up and describe a current problem in your personal or professional life. It could be something simple. And then tell each other the story about a time you had a similar problem and were able to solve it and what you did. Okay? So I'm going to just say switch when it's time to switch. And then the last step is, if you imagine the current situation resolved, what would it look and feel like? So just keep it really simple, but just a simple problem that you've had. You guys going to partner up? Okay, so if you guys are ready, switch. Okay.
What worked best for you? Yes. And see what he's got to say to that, and then make it better what you can do.
Okay, can you guys go ahead and conclude? Is that all right for now? Okay.
I don't know.
Did you feel like you could get a little sense of what it was like to do that?
It was hard.
It was difficult because, why?
She had a great problem, okay? And I had a hard time coming up with an appreciative
Question.
But I did come up with one, although I don't think it was satisfactory. Joanne's problem was that someone dominated, knew that he was going to do it his own way. He came to her to look for a way to get some money, but he was going to do it his own way. So my suggestion to her, or my appreciative interview question was, ask him how did it work, or what worked for him the last time.
Okay, so let me just let you know that I probably didn't explain this clear enough. So if she was having a problem with that customer, the question is for her. Tell me a time when you had a similar problem where somebody was dominating and you were able to solve that. So that's okay, because then it would help her to go back to, oh yeah, I remember when I was with my Uncle Larry and he was really being pushy and this is what I did. And then she has the ability to go back and solve that problem herself.
Okay.
So do you see?
So I misunderstood.
Yes.
Yeah, but you did give me good advice, because
Right.
you said think back on when you had the same situation. And that's what I did.
Yes.
That's what I did.
Yes. All right. So you guys clear about that now? That really what you're doing, you guys did it that way, but I know sometimes it's hard to get in. What happens most of the time when I'm doing this, I'll usually demonstrate it in front of the group. What happens most of the time is that a person, when I ask them to tell me a story about a time they had a similar problem and were able to solve it, they'll actually tell me a story of a similar problem where it was a failure. It's almost like their mind doesn't know how to get out of the groove of where it was a nightmare and go into the place of where it was a success story. So I'll say, do you realize that you actually answered the opposite of what I asked you for? Because that's how rigid our grooves are in the negative problem orientation, as opposed to looking for where we had successes. And sometimes it's hard for people to come up with them at first. So here are some quick tips. Focus on what's working. Avoid analysis and negativity. Your goal is to strictly pull from them all of their own truth and all of their own successes. It's not about a commentary on what they're saying. So you don't want to, and if they get negative and they start talking about what's going wrong, you can say, oh, I can see that's where you don't want it. Where do you want it to head? Oh, I can see where it didn't work. Where does it work? Because again, that groove is going to be so prevalent. You want to really probe relentlessly. You want to encourage them to tell you the stories and all the details and all the images and feelings and the dialogue of it all, okay? You want to listen very intently. You want to be curious. They do all the talking. The only talking you're doing is to draw the information out. You hang on every word and you allow for them to take the time to come up with the answers. Normally this is a long process to get that information. I just wanted you to sort of dip your toe in the water. You want to use interview questions. If possible, you want to kind of script out some questions that you know would be helpful to the conversation, especially if you're having, like with your safety meeting. It would be helpful for you to kind of come up with some ahead of time so that you're not struggling with those at the time of the meeting. And make them, they are fun, naturally, but if you allow them to actually be an expression of fun, it's even better, okay? So that's what we just did, is to quickly pick a partner, take turns. We could have done this one, to take turns sharing a story that describes something you're proud of. That would be an appreciative experience. And then practice the tips for listening, okay? So that's just the rest of the exercise. Okay, so how did that feel when you guys did that interview together?
Great. I was a little awkward for me.
It was a little awkward?
I couldn't come up with, until you showed us the last slide before this. That would have been a lot easier.
Yeah,
if
yeah. I should have probably picked that one, the one of just sharing something that you were proud of.
Okay.
But that might have been simpler for this. But anyway, you kind of get the sense of how different that is from the way we normally talk to one another. Okay. Any questions about this? Because I'm just about finished. We good? Okay.